First of all, welcome to our West Highland Way Training and Inspiration Night. We've got 4 wonderful guests tonight who all have their own little story to tell, their own West Highland Way stories, and how they've, I guess you say, fallen in love with the event in their own little ways, as we all do. One thing I would say is, we all know how Zoom works. Sometimes screens freeze, connections go down. If you do get a buffering or a screen freeze, the easiest way, as always, is to log yourself out and log yourself back in again, because you might be buffering for a while. So just remember to log out, log back in again. As always, I want to say a big thanks to our sponsors and partners of the West Highland Way, before I forget, which is Ultra, Active Route, and Ron Hill. And I think that's all the basic housekeeping notes I have to say. So I'm just going to welcome everyone now. We have 4 wonderful guests tonight. I'm just going to quickly introduce them all, and then we'll have a little chat with them all individually for 5 or 10 minutes, and then we'll be opening it up to all your questions. We do have a chat box going, which you can see at the bottom of the screen as always. And Helen will be monitoring the chat box. So please pile in with your questions for our guests. If you have one already, come with it, put it in now, and Helen can monitor it. If you have something you think of as we go along for each individual guest, then fire that in too. And if we can keep the questions fairly general rather than too individual, that will make it much easier for everyone to learn something from the questions as well. So I'm going to quickly go around the 4 guests. I'm first going to introduce Robbie Drummond. Hi, Robbie. Robbie Dunlop. Sorry, I'm mixing you up with Robbie.
Hi, evening, everyone.
Just tell us where you are at the moment, Robbie.
So I'm in Burke Hill, which is just a little village just outside of Dundee on the east coast of Scotland.
If anyone's ever done the Templeton road race in Dundee, you're just down the road from that, right? Yes?
Literally just round the corner, yeah.
Exactly. Okay, thanks, Robbie. Susie, tell us where you are tonight.
Hi, everyone. I'm in Ayr, probably just about a mile away from Burns Cottage, actually. So, yeah.
Good. So one part of the coast to the other part of the coast. Lynn, tell us where you are tonight.
Hi, I'm in Kilsyth, so just outside of Glasgow, bottom of the Campsie Hills.
Fabulous. Your little training ground in the back there. Yeah. And Donnie, tell us where you're tuning in from.
Good evening. I'm tuning in from my home in Inverness, so up north.
Fabulous. But yeah, still snow on the hills up there?
Not that much, actually, not that much. So yeah, bit of a poor winter so far.
Not to worry. Okay, so we're going to have a little chat with all of our guests, and we'll start with Robbie Dunlop. Let's find my little notes for Robbie. Here we are. So Robbie, you obviously had a background in marathons, running with Dundee Roadrunners over the years, and then you started dabbling in ultras. You ran and won the Cateran in 2019, had a victory in the Ochil Ultra as well. So you've got quite a good, you chose your parents well, should we say, in terms of getting into ultras. But going from the Cateran to the West Highland Way is quite a big jump. What inspired you to think about the West Highland Way in the first place?
First of all, I think my mum's said she was tuning in tonight, so she'll be absolutely thrilled to know that your compliment of choosing my parents well. She'll be messaging me about that later. Yeah, so when I first joined the Dundee Roadrunners, I actually got speaking with Morgan Windrum, who some of you all know has done quite well, or very well, in the race previously. So that kind of piqued my interest at that point as a sort of novice ultra runner. And then she had invited me along, and I actually crewed for her 1 year, I think in 2017. So that was my first experience of what the race was all about. And I was just in absolute awe of how these superhumans could manage to run further than I could sort of conceive at that time, and that absolutely planted the seed for me.
And going from the Cateran, or as people have done the Fling or the Devil for a 50 mile, say, up to the Highland Way, how did your training change?
So I definitely kept sort of a similar structure. So I was down for both the 2020 and 2021 West Highland Way, which obviously succumbed to cancellation due to COVID. So I sort of the similar structure, however, probably added on some extra miles or extra time on the long run, and also maybe just adding on a wee bit of time during the week when I could around sort of family and work, but not too much different, to be quite honest. Maybe just slowing things down a little bit to accommodate obviously running for a sort of longer period of time.
And obviously I'm aware there's very many first timers who are doing the Highland Way this year for the first time. There's big debate about what the longest run should be when you're training. On average, what was your longest run you did building up to the way? Yeah.
So last year I ran the Fling in April. So although some wouldn't count that as a training run, obviously I knew it was going to be a good training stimulus for the West Highland Way, but generally I do a lot of my training by time rather than distance. So I think the longest training run I did was 4.5 hours, with lots of other ones being anywhere between 3 and 4.
Okay, and were they on runnable trails? Are we putting some hills in as well? Certainly.
Bit of both. So where I am, we've got like the Sidlaw Hills just behind the house, just 3 miles away. So a great sort of like small range of not massive hills, but if you can go up and down and do lots of repeats to get the elevation you need. So yeah, lots of trail and lots of elevation, as much as I could manage.
Yeah. And did you have a coach, or were you just sort of doing what you knew would work for you in the past? Yeah.
So previously, I've dabbled in coaching a couple of times, and I would absolutely recommend it to everybody. During the period last year, from the sort of the beginning of 2022 right through to West Highland Way, that was just self-coached.
You can work. There are many schools of thought, but main thing is you get to know your body and what it can cope with and where your own red lines are, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think as well, having a young family and a busy work sort of schedule as well means that I find that I maybe take things maybe a wee bit too seriously and maybe don't have the same flexibility in my own mind when I'm being coached. But I know during certain periods also was of great benefit to me as well. So I know it's a very personal thing for everyone.
Yes. And your race last year in 2022, for those that don't know, Robbie came second in 16 hours and 9 minutes and a few seconds. Did that go to plan?
Pretty near perfect. The wheels came off a little bit at Kinlochleven. I remember lying quite flat on my back, begging my dad and my brother and friend who were crewing me just for 5 more minutes, please, 5 more minutes. But yeah, I ran my own race, and I had a schedule that was pretty flexible, but I sort of was coming in on quite sort of bang on where I thought based on my Fling time in the April, and I'd say apart from that pretty horrid climb out of Kinlochleven after 80 odd miles, yeah, the race was pretty perfect for me last year.
I think those who've done the way a few times would agree with that. It's the climb out of Kinlochleven. If you did it in a 5-mile training run, it's not much of a hill at all. But when it comes at that point in the race, it's interesting. Yeah.
I remember on one of my training runs with Billy Gibson, we ran out. Well, obviously, we ran up it. And I remember we both, like you said at top, oh, I reckon, you know, we might be a bit more tired, but I reckon we could run this, the whole thing, and on the race day. But that was definitely not the case come race day.
And what would you say was the biggest mistake you made last year, either in your training or in the race?
Probably because I did the Fling, I think I felt I didn't quite recover as well as I maybe had first maybe hoped. And I think I was quite quick to try and bag some last minute big miles between the Fling and the West Highland Way. So, and probably tried to add in a wee bit too much intensity. So I probably didn't listen to my body just quite as well as I think I normally do, and maybe sort of tried to do a little bit too much in the lead up. Not to say I didn't turn up fit, but definitely maybe overdid things ever so slightly. So I'm very cautious and aware of that for this year's training.
Yeah. It's a very honest assessment, because it's when you're training for any race this distance, it's getting that fine line between, you've got to push yourself to achieve it, but you don't want a red line and end up being stale on the start line, which it happens. Yeah, so it's very honest assessment, and obviously by looking at your mistakes is how you learn for the future. And will you be adapting your training as a result this year, looking forward to number 2?
Yeah, so my training already looks really different, because I've not had a super winter. I've actually suffered a rib fracture in November. There was sort of misdiagnosed. So I actually only got that diagnosed at the start of January. So things I've just had to curtail and sort of plan a kind of slower build up into the year as I had maybe anticipated initially. But at the moment I'm only down for doing the West Highland Way, so I feel that I've got kind of lots of time to build into it, and obviously a good solid base from a few years now of running sort of a higher mileage.
So you won't be repeating a sort of a long race before the Highland Way, but will you plan any shorter races just to keep you on your toes, or just concentrate on the training block?
Yeah, so I'm hoping in sort of springtime, sort of around that kind of April time, I think might do some shorter races this year. I'm not nothing specifically booked yet, but there's like the Dukery Hill Canter and the Burnham Hill race, and even some local races. There's a couple of half marathons and that are run here, so I might do that as a sort of sharpener, for one for a better phrase, just to keep the kind of racecraft. Although it's not obviously running ultras, but just to keep that kind of racecraft up.
Yes, certainly, yeah. Okay, and just lastly, crew is such a personal thing, and obviously everyone listening who's running this year will be thinking about, if they haven't got their crew already, will be thinking about their crew. How many crew did you have with you last year?
So I had 3. So I had my dad, my brother-in-law, and then a good friend. And they were there right from the start, right through to the end. They didn't want to do any changing over or anything like that. They were quite keen to be part of the whole experience. Okay, yeah.
And it's a slippery slope, I know. Are any of them tempted to run it themselves in future?
Not my dad and my brother-in-law, not in particular, but my friend signed up for his first marathon this year. He's stepping up in distance, so he's definitely got inspired from seeing all the great running that was happening last year.
Fabulous, that's great. So we'll come back to Robbie later, but I just want to move on to Lynn now. Hi, Lynn.
Hi.
You've unmuted yourself, thank you. Lynn ran her first West Highland Way in 2017, and what a debut, because she actually won it that year in 18 hours 48. Fast forward 5 years to 2022, last summer, she ran it for the second time and ran 18 hours 46, about 90 seconds quicker than previous time, which I have to say is consistent. So Lynn, what inspired you to run the West Highland Way in the first place back in 2017?
So I'd actually walked the West Highland Way a few years previously with a couple of friends, camped the whole way, carried all our gear, and at the time I had some good friends that I used to go to the gym with, and one of my friends said, do you know people run this route? And I couldn't really get my head around it, and I was like, it just kind of planted that seed, and I think from then it was a good few years in the making, but I just thought I want to do this, and it was kind of a target from that time of hearing it, because like Robbie was saying, I couldn't really understand how people could do that. And then when I kind of got into the ultra running community and what have you, and you get talking to people and what have you, people would be saying, oh, I've done this and done that, and telling you what races they'd done, the West Highland Way and that. And I just realised, though, just kind of ordinary people. They weren't really superhumans that I thought they were. So it kind of made us think, oh, well, actually, I might be able to do that. So yeah, that really inspired us to do it as well.
Yeah. And looking back on 2017, did you have a schedule as such? Did you have any coaching, or were you just sort of winging it and doing your own sort of thing, just building on what you had done up to then? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Winging it, really. Yeah. I had done a few longer races. I had done the wall, so Hadrian's Wall, Carlisle to Newcastle, which was 69 miles. So I was just kind of gradually stepping up distances. Training wise, I did way too much. My longest training weekend before 2017 was the whole of the West Highland Way as a back-to-back, which I would not recommend doing. It worked out okay. I came out uninjured, but I ran to Tyndrum and then stayed over at Tyndrum in the way, the lodges up there, and then just on my own. Then the next day went to Fort William and got the train back. So yeah, I was really pretty much winging it, and I thought I just need to get as many miles in as possible, sort of thing. And then I say I was probably quite lucky because I didn't get any injuries through that, but looking back on it from experience, I think it was a little bit crazy.
It's not going to disagree with that, but it's like Robbie, it's great that you're being very honest in your mistakes, because we've all been there. We've all made sort of what seems like a sensible idea at the time to go and do as you did that, but you wouldn't recommend it to any first timers this year to go and repeat the same thing, no?
No. I would say you don't need to run that long distance before the race.
So fast forwarding to 2022 a little bit, you've obviously got a lot more background and a few more races in between. Even last year you did the Cheviot Goat back in late winter. Then I think you did, well, I know you did the Anglo-Celtic Plate at Perth. Got your Scotland top on now, I see, very good. And then obviously the West Highland Way. Were those races your longest runs for building up to your second Highland Way, or were you doing other races in between or other sort of weekend adventures?
They were my longest runs, yes. Again, as you say, we're always learning, so I hadn't really planned to do the Cheviot Goat and the 100k so close together, but with COVID, I had entered the Cheviot Goat for the winter time, so in December, and it had been cancelled several times. And when it was rescheduled for March, just thought, right, I'm going to do this race. And then I think, so you can have naivety where you can go in without knowing what you're doing, which I did with the West Highland Way, but you can also get a wee bit complacent, I think. So I was just like, oh, it'll be fine. But yeah, those were the two longest runs that I did. And then in training wise, the longest run that I did in Run It was just about 40 miles. So I did, basically did the Devil Route as my longest training run for the actual race.
Okay. Interesting you chose to do the second half of training. For anyone who's doing it for the first time, and it might be from down south, they might be local and wanting to get to the way. Obviously, we all know that two of the biggest climbs are in that last third of the race. Would you recommend that is a must recce bit of the route if the people can?
If they can, yeah, I would say so, definitely. It's the Devil's Staircase, I would say, is a good recce. Even the Devil's, even Glencoe into Fort William is a brilliant section. I think if you can recce, I would say I would probably recommend that. And also if you can get Lochside would be the other section I would recommend as well.
Very good. And last year, I believe you were coached by Donnie.
Yep.
Having Donnie as a coach, how did that change your whole attitude to training compared with when you were just winging it back in 2017?
There was a lot more structure to the training, more structured sessions, and as well, just maybe being more aware of how I was feeling physically. So if I was talking to my coach weekly, it would kind of maybe just make me realize, like, well, am I a little bit tired this week? Do we need to dial it back a little bit? So it was just really having that feedback and that second kind of voice, a voice of reason almost, to say, well, you don't maybe need to do this week. We can change that to that week. So it was really good in that way, just having that second opinion, I would say, and just a bit of guidance as well, sort of thing. It was pretty invaluable, actually.
Yeah. Interesting point, is that, as Robbie alluded to as well, you can fall into the trap of just being too regimented and overdoing it. And
Yes.
for anyone doing the wave for the first time, if they're doing their first 100 mile, it's okay to sort of ease back 1 week. It's not a problem, in your opinion. No.
No. Also nutrition wise as well, it was very useful to have a coach to just go through nutrition strategies and race strategies and that sort of thing as well.
Yeah, and do you feel it just gave you much more confidence going into the race? Yes.
Yes, very much so.
But as people listening, as we listen to all four people, you'll find that there is no off-the-shelf solution. Some people have a coach, some people are fine without a coach. It's just, the key thing is to know and listen to your body and just find where your own red lines are and not be afraid to sort of dial things back a bit. Yeah. Sometimes less is more. I think that's the key thing for anyone training for the Highland Way. Yeah. And from your first one, what would you say was the biggest lesson you learned from first one going into your second West Highland Way?
I would say it was probably nutrition.
Okay.
I felt I ate properly throughout last year's race, and felt I finished really strong with that. Whereas in 2017, towards the end, it was a little bit of I don't mean it's going to be a struggle no matter what, but I did feel the difference. I did feel that I was more fresh towards the end, and I would put that down to the nutrition.
You were certainly strong at the end, because I had this abiding memory of last year of seeing someone, I was at the finish at Fort William, tweeting a picture of you and Saki at Lundavra. For those that haven't seen it, it'd be on Twitter or somewhere out there that Lynn was ahead, I think, and Saki was on their tail. It was about 3 minutes between them at Kinlochleven, and also only 3 minutes between them at Lundavra. You obviously came in first, but you were neck and neck going out of that checkpoint. But
yep.
What sort of mind games do you play with yourself to sort of just keep your head in gear when you've got someone literally right on your coattails?
It was such a temptation to look behind me, going along the Larrig Moor,
Yep.
towards Lundavra, from Kinlochleven to Lundavra. I just really had to focus on what I was doing and try not to think what was happening behind me. And you know how you have quite a big view behind you? And it was just so tempting to have a little glance over the shoulder and see what was happening. And I just kept saying to myself, just do what you're doing. So yeah, it was just kind of a concentrating on my race, really. I think if you're kind of thinking what other people are doing, you can waste a lot of energy, I think, doing that. So if your mind's thinking what's happening behind me, you're kind of using up mental energy doing that. So I just tried to concentrate on my race, and just keep my head in the game, sort of thing. Yeah.
And I think that's the thought, that doesn't matter what standard you are, whether you're at the sharp end or whether you're just you're chasing the cutoffs. It's just keeping your head in gear and just concentrating on the next checkpoint, all the way through. Yeah, right. Okay, well, thanks very much, Lynn. We'll come back to you in a minute, and we might pick up on you and Donnie and how your relationship worked coaching wise later on. Can have a little break now and bring Ian in. Ian, this could be a good time just to break up and you give the sort of any race housekeeping notes you want to give to everybody.
Thanks, Adrian. I think what we've tried to do this year is we've sent out the provisional race rules, which I emailed out last week to everybody on the entry list. So hopefully everybody's received them. They're also on the website and they're on the Facebook page. I think there's a link from the Instagram page. I'd ask everybody just to read them in detail because it helps a lot with the planning. people have been asking some questions. There's questions tonight, like, do I need a crew? Well, that's all explained in there. It explains how the crew works. It explains where your crew has to meet you. The answer is yes, of course, you do need a crew. It's compulsory and they need to be at registration at the start. But it goes through everything, and it's worth just having a detailed read through and thinking, oh, is there anything that maybe I hadn't quite appreciated that or hadn't built into my planning? One of the things that we're always very keen on is that people attend the prize giving in Fort William on the Sunday. That for some folk takes a wee bit of planning as well. It's 12 o'clock on the Sunday. It's just a fantastic experience, and I'm sure the panelists have all been there, all seen it. There's around 700 people in the room congratulating everybody who's finished, and it's just wonderful. So it would be a shame to miss out on that if you had arranged that you had to be away earlier or before the race. So please have a read through. If there's questions, then we're happy to pick up. We do say they're provisional. They'll be finalised in May, but we hope that not much will change from that. If things change, it's because circumstances have changed such that we need to make one or two adjustments, but I would expect 99% of it to remain the same.
Thanks, Ian. While we're having a break between speakers, Helen, any questions coming in pertinent to what Lynn and Robbie have been chatting about?
That didn't work. No, not at the moment is what I tried to say. It did say hold your space bar, but it didn't work. So there you go. No, just a couple of specific ones there that have been covered.
Fabulous. Right, I'll find my next little notes. Right.
Oh, there's one just now, Adrian, from Jack saying, can I ask, what did they eat on the way round? Well,
we'll fire that back at Lynn, because Lynn seemed to be, her nutrition was obviously perfect second time around by the sound of it. So what did you, in terms of gels, liquids, solid food, what sort of things were you having and how often?
Yeah, so while I was running, I mainly relied on gels, and I was taking probably one every 30 minutes or so. And for kind of real food, I found that what worked really well for me was like noodles sort of based food. Found them quite easy to take down. So I had noodles at Tendrum, and then I had chips at Glencoe, which went down brilliantly, and I can't even remember. I think it was more noodles. It was more noodles at Kinlochleven. But yeah, I think that mixture of solid food and gels worked really well for me. Mm-hmm.
And Robbie, how about you in terms of your nutrition?
Yeah, similar to Lynn. While I was running, a mixture of gels and like wine gums and jelly babies. I've got quite a sweet tooth, so having like the wine gums and jelly babies is just an excuse to stuff them in while I'm running. And then at checkpoints, I actually found myself for the first time not being able to stomach some of the foods that I'd actually tried during some of my training runs. So I'd had like peanut butter and jam sandwiches packed or some bagels, but for some reason they just weren't sort of going down so well. So I found something that did really work well with me was those little porridge pots. And my crew would make them up before I arrived and make them quite watery. So they were almost I could drink them as opposed to sort of eat them as I kind of walked out of the checkpoints. They went down really well. I felt they gave me lots of energy.
But in many cases, do you feel that you have to try things in training and find what works for you? There's no off-the-shelf solution for everybody. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. The longer I've been sort of into the ultra running, the more I realise just how important sort of like training the gut is, as well as training our sort of bodies and minds. Yeah, so definitely try. I wouldn't leave anything to race day. I'd make sure you try it during your long runs. Absolutely.
Great. That's good.
There's another
Sure,
couple,
do you want
Adrian.
that?
Do you want to do them just now?
Yes, Alan, let's
One
have
of
them
them,
in now.
one of them mentions you. Stephen says that his questions around training. I know Adrian is a very big fan of hiking as a complementary training piece, but what about the guests? Hiking, walking, skiing, etc. Do people do a lot of cross training, or is it eat, sleep and breathe running?
Let's take that one to the coach, because I know Donnie has a lot of experience in not running as part of his training. Donnie, how would you advocate mixing training up, especially over the winter months? Yeah.
So first of all, everyone's an individual. So what I say might work for one athlete, might not work for another athlete. So everyone's got to remember individuality. So that's why you get loads of different training approaches. General answer to the question, yeah, cross training is good, especially further away from the event. It keeps it varied, keeps motivation high, keeps running kind of your motivation high. So yeah, skiing, hiking, cycling, all these kind of things are good cross training. It's just getting the balance right and when to increase the running volume. And it's good as well if, for example, you know you can only say tolerate a 40-mile, 50-mile week because of injuries, then you can work on your cardio by cross training, whether that be cycling or even on the cross trainer in the gym or hill walking or ski mountaineering in winter. So it depends on the individual, but yeah, if used in the right places, it can be beneficial, especially if you know that actually increasing your running volume too quick or you got a niggle, then sometimes not doing an impact sport like running, so like cycling or even on the cross trainer, can kind of keep the fitness up while the body recovers from whatever niggle or injury you have.
That makes a very important point, because in any build-up, even to a marathon, let alone the West Highland way, you're going to have a week or a 10-day period where you've got a little niggle of some sort, and just stopping the impact, as Donnie says, and getting on the bike or going to the gym just keeps your cardiovascular up and stops you going mental as well. You're still doing something and not looking at four walls thinking, can't go running today. Yeah. Susie, how about you? Do you do anything apart from running?
Hi there, Adrian. Sorry, eventually managed to work out how to mute it there. The boys that I was looking earlier on, I think. Sorry about that. Last year I was doing quite a wee bit of cycling, just really to work and back. The year before and this year as well, I actually just use getting to work and coming back from work to get my runs in. But last year I certainly did a lot more cycling so that I could do more kind of intense training sessions. Like when I was actually finished work, I could go out and do my training session, then cycle home, as opposed to too much running. So yeah, I was doing a bit of cycling. But also the year before as well, I was actually going over to Arran a lot and doing a lot of walking as well. Up and round about Goatfell and up to the Saddle. So I think that really helped as well, just getting time in my feet and being out quite a wee while.
Great.
On that terrain, yeah, on the trails.
Good. And how about you, Lynn? Did you do anything apart from just running?
Mainly walking. I've got 2 dogs. I also do a bit of open water swimming also, but that's more kind of, I don't know if that's mental resilience. So I do the cold water swimming. I don't think there's much physical effect, but it definitely helps mental resilience. And yeah, I've got 2 wee dogs, so I do walk them a lot. So walking would be cross training and a wee bit of swimming.
Yeah. As a question referenced me, I'll go back to when I was training sort of fairly regularly for the way. I do long runs, of course, but some weekends, it's a tip I learned from my first one to my second one, I think, that the big hills come in the last third of the race. So you've got to be able to cope with hills when you're tired, basically. So I used to do a long run on a Saturday sometimes, and then on a Sunday, I wouldn't run, but I'd go and find a Monroe and just walk up it. So you're doing some climbing when you're tired. It has the same sort of effect as doing a back-to-back sort of running weekend, but you're not running one day, you're just doing a big hill. But you can experiment and mix it up, but it's getting used to having that feeling of tackling hills when you're tired and you don't really want to go up them. So it's many ways you can sort of find other things to do, I think. Yeah. Okay. Was there another question, Helen, or was that for now?
There's another couple.
Okay.
Very quick one. Andy's asking how long the presentation takes because his flight's at 7:20 from Glasgow. So he's hoping that he'll make it back in plenty of time.
Oh, I think we usually get it done in about an hour and a quarter, hour and a half.
I was thinking about an hour and a half last time. Yeah.
Yeah, we try not to be over that because people are a bit tired.
Tired.
So we try to keep it to an hour and a half. So it should be finished by about 1:30-ish.
That should give you plenty of time to get down to Glasgow, I would hope. Yeah, certainly. Yeah.
Okay, and
Within
one from
terms of the-
Katie.
Yes,
Katie Hall
Katie.
is asking, is there anything your crew did that you found particularly useful or appreciated?
Let's throw that one at Susie, because I know she has a story to tell what happened to her at Kinlochleven.
Probably before I even got to Kinlochleven, when I was coming down into Glencoe, I had to have a wee bit of a stop there. And I think by that time I was starting to kind of waver a wee bit, and I did get a talking to by one of my crew who just happened to be my husband. So I was getting the finger pointed at me as well. You want to do this? Do you want to be the first Hubbard to finish the West Highland Way? And yes. So on the way out, I remember the marshal actually saying to me on the way past, "Now, were you listening to all that?" He was giving me the finger wave as well. So, but by the time I got up the Devil's Staircase and eventually managed to get over that and down into Kinlochleven, I think that was me. I'd listened last year to one of the presenters saying, "Give yourself 3 chances." And I think coming down into Kinlochleven that night, that was my 3rd chance. I was done. I thought, there's absolutely no way that I can finish this. I was sleeping in my feet and hallucinating, and the boulders were presenting all sorts of things to me on the way down there. So what my crew did then was just put me to sleep. I was needing a sleep, and it was actually Ian Beattie that had said, just get her down for a sleep, see what she's like. And I think my husband Raymond had said, well, we give her about 4 hours sleep. So I think I got an hour, because Ian had said, no way, get her up after an hour and get her off. And that was the best thing. I've got videos of me actually lying snoring in the games hall floor in Kinlochleven. I've never been so happy to see a games hall floor in my life. For those of you that know that I teach PE, on a Saturday night, a games hall floor was most welcoming. So just getting that hour's sleep, it was absolutely fantastic, and getting woken up with a cup of tea and a wee jam biscuit, and I was raring to go again. Brilliant. So if you need, that would be my one piece of advice. If you feel that you need a sleep, go for it, because it could save you hours, I think, and actually even get you to the finish.
Nice words, yes. Robbie, do you have a moment when your crew were just invaluable?
I think lots of people I spoke to said that they had previously really liked the fact that they had asked someone who had either done the race before or where, they ran themselves. But I wanted the day to be sort of a bit of like a sort of close-knit affair. So like with my dad and my brother-in-law and my friends kind of not having done any ultras or sort of been around the wonderful ultra scene before, I found that they were just relaxed, and there was no pressure on me. So when I came into checkpoints, they were just checking in on me, just making sure I was okay, and letting me kind of lead them in terms of like what I needed. But obviously, the further on we got, they were just telling me what to eat and things like that, because obviously I'd written things down, so everything was all pre-planned. But yeah, just very relaxed and very lacking in any pressure. It was just letting me do my thing. And that really worked for me.
And I know Donnie's seen it from both sides of the track, because you've run it a few times. We'll come on to that in a minute when we chat to you. And you also crewed for Rachel, and Rachel is Donnie's wife, who ran it in 2019. And so you've seen it from both sides. What is more stressful, running it or crewing it?
Crewing it.
Crewing it, absolutely.
Crewing it. Crewing it's harder.
Yeah. Okay, you heard it from the horse's mouth. So any crew who are on the call, be ready for a busy weekend. Yeah. But in the times that you've run it before, how invaluable were your crew to you?
Very valuable. Like, you know, without them, you're not going to be successful. And it's good to have a crew that you know or has a good sense of humour, because it is a good fun weekend. And, you know, looking back, like the stories me and my crew have got, and stupid stories like me being grumpy as usual with them, but they knew I was just tired. So yeah, as long as your crew's got a good sense of humour and you can laugh at yourself, it'll be a fun weekend.
Yeah. That is something over the years I think the race has built up, having the crew. Some people question why we insist on crew, and partly it's a safety reason, partly it's just part of the tradition of the whole race. I think Ian and John and Helen will agree that the crew actually help make the weekend just something special as well. It just makes that for that whole family atmosphere. And it's when you get to Fort William and you've not just got the runners in that hall at the Prizeum, you've got all the crew as well, and all the crew and all the runners just, there's just this tide of emotion of just appreciating what every single one of you has gone through over that fun weekend. When I think, as Fiona Rennie once said, one weekend in the year we just let loose to have fun on the hills, and what fun we do have. Yeah.
I think the other thing, Adrian, and again, this is maybe for crews primarily, but worth the runners knowing as well, if you get into a checkpoint and your crew's not there for whatever reason, and we've had that happen where we've had cars break down and worse, don't panic, because a crew is a crew is a crew, and they'll look after you, and they help each other out. And by the same token, don't be afraid to ask another runner's crew for help. But I think if anybody sees somebody that looks like they're a bit lost and they're struggling, they'll step in and give them a hand. So bear that one in mind.
Okay, so we'll move on and just have a little chat with Susie now, because Susie, you just heard her say a few words there. Susie, in amongst these three runners here who are quite sort of fast, shall we say, and have all run substantially under 20 hours for the Highland Way, Susie is just like most people. The bulk of finishers in the West Highland Way finish usually between 24 hours and about 32 hours. And Susie ran it in just over 31 hours last year in her first one. So hopefully a lot of people on this call doing it for the first time who are a bit in awe of people like Donnie and Robbie and Lynn will be able to relate to Susie as one of their own, shall we say. Susie also she's a PE teacher. She's got 4 children. So she's got to balance all that and still try to train for a 100-mile event. How do you do that, Susie?
I don't know. I think a lot of the time I'm just trying to fit my running in round about the children who are the priority still at the moment. As I said earlier, I use a lot of my time like going to and from work, getting runs in. At the moment, 3 of my children, my girls, are really involved in running as well. They're doing all the cross country at the moment. So a lot of the time I'm maybe trying to like go a run in the morning and then go to the event with them and try and, you know, accumulate through the day, like go around the course with them, support them on the course. And then maybe on the way home, I'll get dropped off, maybe 12 miles out or so, and then just run home from there. So I'm maybe trying to accumulate, you know, during the day. Last year, well, really during lockdown, actually, that's when I started much longer stuff. Before that, I had been doing, after I'd had the children, I set myself little goals. Right, I want to do like a 10K under 42 minutes, a half marathon under an hour and a half, and like a 10-mile, whatever. I've never wanted to do a marathon because I think that's just too long trying to get a time. So I thought I'll just jump to the ultras. I can just take my time, admire the scenery, take a wee picnic, as my running buddy Karen would say, and just enjoy the day, stop and take pictures. So during the lockdown, it was actually a really good incentive having the virtual events as well. So that really got me out and got me doing a lot longer runs and a lot longer roundabout here as well. One of the chaps that I was training with, Alistair Meldrum, he was my personal tour guide going up the Carrick Hills and whatever. A lot of lovely routes up there down towards Culzean on the coastal path. So it really kind of opened up like a lot of trails and things for me. And then once we started doing the virtual, then I just kind of got hooked on it. And I think, well, it was Mark Caldwell that had said to me, you could do it. It was 2020. And he said, 2022, that's you should be aiming for West Highland Way. And I was like, no way could I do that. You know, I don't know how anybody can ever do that. So that kind of planted the seed, and the challenge was there. So that's why that was the goal.
Yeah. And obviously I'm aware you come from a very sporting family.
Yeah.
People local to Susie will know her background, but Susie's husband, Ray, was a very competent marathon runner. I won't embarrass him now, but if you might not find anything because it's so long ago, but Google Ray Hubbard 3 marathons in 1 weekend and see what you come up with. I'll say no more.
Yeah.
And also, some people might not be aware the name of Jimmy Hubbard, who is Ray's dad, your father-in-law, who played for Rangers for many years and is still fondly thought of in the Rangers fraternity. Yes, right. So very sporting family, and it's being passed on to the daughters who are all doing the national, all 3 of them doing the national this Saturday.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Great place to be on Saturday if you're anywhere near Falkirk. If you're not running, go and take it in. It's one of the most fabulous running events in the calendar. Great atmosphere all around. So before the Highland Way, the longest race you'd done, I believe, was the Conic Canter.
Yes, it was. Yep. Although I had done a 12. Sorry. I had done a 12-hour at Kilmarnock. They had done one at Kilmarnock that was a 12 and a 24-hour. So I opted for the 12-hour. So that was my kind of first dip in the water, if you like. And then we were going to go on and do Cateran the following year, and then it got cancelled. So yeah, but then Conic Canter came up, brilliant. It's my first wee taste of racing on the West Highland Way, which was great.
You mentioned obviously there's the physical side of it, and going from something like the Conic Canter to a 12-hour, then the Highland Way, it's still a big gap. And a lot of runners talk about almost looking through the eye of a needle and wondering what on earth is on the other side of that needle. Did you ever have any sort of like mental traumas in the build-up, thinking I've taken on more than I can chew?
Absolutely. Every morning I woke up, Adrian, from me getting a place, from me getting an entry, every morning I woke up and thought, oh my goodness, what have I done? Literally. And then I did the Highland Fling, and I got to the end of that, and wee George McGregor had been helping me out a lot as well, who I know helps out a lot. And he was at the end, and I said, George, and I was feeling really sick. I think I actually overheated on the Highland Fling. And I was really sick afterwards, and I said, George, there's absolutely no way I can run the full thing after that. But that was very quickly forgotten. And just it's a lot of mental toughness, very much so mental toughness. So I think just going from checkpoint to checkpoint and just changing your whole mentality, like on the route, and just enjoying the route as well. Just lots of different parts of it, and every part's different. It's a privilege to be on it. Yeah.
And I think you're living proof, especially with the incident you had at Kinloch Leven, that there's 3 takeaways from that, is that your crew are very important in an event like this.
Absolutely.
Absolutely invaluable. You're never as tired as you think you are.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes magic just happens and you can't understand it, but it just does, and you're grateful when it does happen.
Mm-hmm. I think that's what really struck me, because I thought when I started hallucinating, nobody had ever really spoken about that before, and I was thinking I must be in a really bad way here to be feeling like this. And I know people said to me afterwards when I came into Kinloch Leven, they thought, oh, there's no way that she's going to get back out that door again. But I think because I didn't expect that, it didn't scare me, but I thought, oh, I must be really tired. I can't possibly go any further. But then just speaking to people after it, and everybody that you spoke to, they were saying, oh, I was seeing this and I was seeing that. And I thought, oh my goodness, it happens to most people. So I think that was just reassuring. But I think a lot of it is very, very much mental toughness. And we do quite a lot of work on that at school. And I think last year when I was listening, I'd heard, I think it was Debbie that I'd heard saying, recognise, accept it and deal with it. There's one thing that we do at school, it's called the 3 R's. And it's recognising that there's something wrong, either mentally or physically. And the second R is like regroup your thoughts. In other words, give yourself a good talking to, or get your crew to give you a good talking to, tell you that you look brilliant. And then the third R is like refocus on what you've got in your plan. And for me, that was a really big thing. I had a really, really detailed plan for my crew as well. Some of them, or most of them, hadn't run on the West Highland Way either. So I was even putting on my plan, what they were to expect and what they had to bring in their bag to wear, or what footwear, but I think that was having that as well. And that was, I'd got quite a few plans. Mark Caldwell had given us one from when we had actually run back to back on the West Highland Way the year before. And then I had got a really good plan from Alistair Meldrum as well, just giving a lot of details and making sure like you have like life 360 so that your crew know where you are. For every checkpoint I had like Robbie, like what I would want to eat, possibly want to eat. If I was sitting for something to eat, I would have that in red, what I wanted. If I was taking it to go, I would have that in green. So just wee things like that I think helped everybody. And I think what I was going to say, I got to a point at Kinloch leaving that I was not able to make decisions for myself. And I think having my crew know me well, just telling me, just go, do this, get on with it, get back onto the plan, I think that really, really helped. Along with Ian telling them, get her for a sleep and get her back out the door again. Tell her she looks great. Now, away you go.
Right. One big takeaway I get from that, which is also useful for anyone else doing this for the first time, is you almost, in the build-up to the race, had this sort of support crew around you of people who'd done, if not the Highland Way, had done lots of big ultras before. So you had a lot of experience to tap into. And that's something people often forget when they're training by themselves for an event. There's a big community out there to tap into. Just go on the Facebook page and link up with people. The race Facebook page is a wonderful place to link up with people for training runs and just chatting about all manner of things. Yeah, there are no stupid questions to ask. Nothing's out of bounds. Just anyone listening to this has any questions not covered tonight, just put it on the Facebook page. You'll be delighted what responses you get. Be up to you to distill what's relevant to you, of course. As we know with Facebook, but there's no shortage of experience out there to help you all get to that finish line. Okay, Susie, thanks ever so much for that. Just one thing I also want to pick up on. Another native of Ayrshire, I recall, did this race in 2019, Kirsten Cowling, the wonderful Kirsten Cowling. And we had her on one of the inspiration nights in 2020. And I remember asking her what the West Highland Way meant to her. And she sort of said, quite emotionally, actually, and I can feel it myself now, running that race actually changed my whole life. Some people might remember it happening. Would you say it's changed your life in some ways?
I think it's made me a much more determined person. Okay. Yeah, if I set myself a challenge, but it definitely has. It has changed my life, just being part of that whole experience and feeling now that you're within that whole family. And you're absolutely right what you say, Jane. There's so much experience out there from other runners, and everybody's just, so friendly and willing to help and encouraging, and it's a really great family to be part of.
Great. Thank you. That's great. Okay, we'll turn to our fourth guest now, who doesn't need much introduction. Donny Campbell, Esquire, self-styled King of the Munros. For those of you who haven't got a clue what we're talking about, just Google Donny Munro and Donny Campbell, sorry, and Munro expedition. Completed all his Munros in 31 days and something, and took a week off the record, which is absolutely phenomenal experience. But we're here tonight to talk about his West Highland Way experiences, because back in 2011, as a little 25-year-old, were you then in 2011, Donny?
I have no idea. Yeah, mid-20s, early 20s.
Far too young to be running the West Highland Way, some would say, yes. But you found yourself on the start line of the West Highland Way at 25 years old. Quite inexperienced, I have to say. Tell us how you got there. What motivated you, and what was your motivation for doing it?
So when was my actual first West Highland? Was it 2011 or 2010? I can't remember.
2010. Yes.
2010, yeah.
1 hours and 24 minutes. Yes.
Yeah. So basically, I just finished uni, I think late 2000, 2008, 2009. Year before, so 2009, I was training to get fit again after university to play shinty. That's my first sport. I played shinty to quite a high level when I was at school. I was representing Scotland at under 17 level in shinty hurley. So I basically just got into running. So that's what I used to do to keep fit. I used to be in the Marines as well before I joined uni. And a friend said, "Oh, come and do this ultra on Highland&John at the time." So it was like MDS style, 5 days. I think it's about 140, 150 miles. I was like, "Oh, that sounds like a good bit of motivation to train for." And something I kind of enjoyed from time in the Marines. So I did that, got fit, and finished it. And then after that, it's like, oh, this is really cool. I didn't realize there was a thing as such as trail running or hill running. And then found the West Highland Way race. I was like, let's do that. That looks like cool fun. And it was that a transition time for the West Highland Way, because it was Ian Beattie was just taking over after Dario. So it's quite a sad time. I remember messaging, I think, the page, and there was a long bit of reply as the race was transitioning on that. So that's where I kind of got into the West Highland Way in 2010. Such a novice back then, and so many mistakes that year.
So in your first year, just highlight one of the biggest mistakes you made in your first year. If you can remember that far back.
I think it was just training, really. It all came down to training. As I got more experience, I've kind of and got more knowledge on training. So training and nutrition were probably the biggest things I kind of failed on. Probably maybe doing too much, not enough structure. Nutrition-wise, I didn't train nutrition. I just, fueled and rubbish. And I remember basically getting Kinlochleven and then having to walk the rest of the way. Like, I remember literally, that was it. I remember downing like one of these cartons of like smoothie juice, thinking, oh, that'll be great. That's easy to get down, loads of calories. Down that, and then halfway up the climb out of Kinlochleven, I spewed it all back up like proper projectile vomit. So it was a slow walk to Fort William after that.
Fast forward to 2011, you're doing it again, and that was the year you didn't just run the West Highland Way, but you carried on a bit further.
Yeah.
You want to just tell us a little bit about that little adventure and how that came about?
Cool. So obviously I finished the West Highland Way, not the best time, I would say, for my ambitions, 21 hours. But what really got me, because I was very new at this sport and hadn't heard much about ultra running, is people that were out for like 30 plus hours and going through the second night. I was like, oh, that sounds really good fun. That sounds like a real big challenge. And like my admiration for the people that were still out slogging it on Saturday night. Obviously I finished, I think, 2010 about 9-10 o'clock. I think it was just about getting dark, but there's people out till Sunday afternoon, and that was kind of like my curiosity off the back of 2010. It's like, that is interesting. And I was like, okay, how do I replicate that to a certain extent? How do I kind of see if I can go for like 40 plus hours? And then the logical thing at the time was I was at uni in Glasgow, lived in the Isle of Skye. West Highland Way goes halfway, well, I might as well just carry on running home. And that's kind of where the idea came about. So 2011, I ran the West Highland Way and then carried home to Skye. So it was a great year. I think my time wasn't too bad either that year for the West Highland Way.
The Highland Way you completed in 22:35, which is a time a lot of people would be really happy to do. You then carried on right up to Portree, I believe, 184 miles in total, which I believe, when I looked up the record, was 44 hours and 30 minutes on your feet.
Yeah.
And included a boat crossing to
Yeah.
Skye.
Yeah. I cheated. I didn't swim. I got the boat from Mallock to Armadale. So yeah, I kind of cheated there, but we'll keep that quiet.
Okay, we'll let you off on that one. It must be an amazing adventure, but another illustration that you're never as tired as you think you are. You can do the Highland Way and still go further if you want to, but is that all in the head or is that in the training, Donny? Yeah.
A bit of both.
Yeah.
A bit of both. There's people have done that and gone on to do the Great Glen Way, and there's people have tried to do that and run back the way and all sorts of variations. I think training and mental. So obviously, if you think you're running out, so for example, you're doing the Highland Fling, people will get to the Highland Fling and feel like I could not carry another step, and they've entered the West Highland Way and they start worrying. It's like, but you're mentally prepared to run 50 miles or 80k and finish in Tyndrum. When you start in the West Highland Way, you're mentally prepared to finish in Fort William. When you start on a challenge, you're mentally prepared to finish like 184 miles down the road. That's where your finish point is. So from that perspective, then yeah, you gauge your effort on that distance. But yeah, then a lot of it comes down to mental toughness or that, and just good old sports psychology. Like I've got a degree in sports coaching and development, so really getting in sports psychology, so positive self-talk, goal setting, imagery, all that kind of stuff can help get you through the low points and stuff. And I still remember a funny story from 2011. I was on a remote road. I think it was about 4 a.m. Sunlight was coming up. I was on my way to Mallock, and I was running up a hill, and I was shouting at myself to motivate myself. I was like really shouting, thinking there was no one about. And then someone in the car kind of drove behind me and obviously heard me shouting and felt sorry for me and stopped and offered me a lift to Mallock. And I was like, well, I'm running to get the ferry. And I was like, oh, I can give you a lift to Mallock. I can't accept it. It's like, but I'm going to Mallock. And I'm trying to explain that I'm running to Skye. She just looked at me really confused. So yeah.
Yeah, we're all quite normal really, Donny. It's okay.
Yeah.
So fast forward another year to 2012, and it's almost like you've been doing ultras for 3 or 4 years now. You're almost getting the hang of this sort of thing.
Yeah.
Because you improved to 17 hours 51 and placed 3rd.
Yeah.
In what was a good year, because it's no shame being beaten by the likes of Terry Conway, who I think set the record that year, and a young little upstart by the name of Paul Giblin.
Yeah.
Second that before his string of victories in succeeding years. So what big sea change was there between your 2 early ones and then improving by almost 4 hours to get to another level completely?
I think consistency and training blocks. So everyone thinks I'll training 6 months and I'll get fit, but actually training's a lifetime. So if you can avoid injury and link training blocks year on year, you're to a certain extent you're going to progress on that. So for me, from 2009, 2008, when I got into running to lose weight, because I was, when I left university, I was about 17 stone. So kind of that gradual progress from over the 3 or 4 years. I obviously lost a bit more weight into 2012, but then also from experience of knowing how to train better, how to fuel better. So yeah, there's loads of changes in my approach over the years. And I'd probably say there's more changes from 2010 to 2011, because 2011, I wasn't far off my 2010 time, but I knew I was running longer and I was actually in quite good shape when I got to Fort William in 2011. So I think the biggest changes from 2010 to 2011, whereas I think I focused a bit more on structured training, a bit more nutrition on that, and then just more experience and just that general year on year. So obviously, if you look at my career in running, after 2012, I think I improved again on other times. And if you looked at my not West Highland Way, but my Highland Fling times, I did that for 4 or 5 years, and they all just gradually trend quicker on that. So I think it's just consistency and learning and adapting and knowing what works for you as an athlete. So what my approach to training is different from what I would prescribe other athletes, because I know how my body tolerates volume or tolerates speed sessions, and I know the areas I need to work on as an athlete, and that might be different from Robbie or Lynn or anyone else in the group chat.
And obviously, we're talking about your improvement of 4 hours from going 21 hours down to 17 hours. But that year-on-year training is certainly just as applicable to someone like Susie, who's run 31 and probably, I'm pretty sure, wants to run under 30 hours comfortably this year. Yeah. So that's applicable to whatever your standard, Donnie. It doesn't have to be. It's not just people at the sharp end like you, but people just training for their first one or their second one. It's going that
so
growth,
I've coached numerous West Highland Way finishers, and some have finished in under 24 hours, some have finished under 35 hours. And people have gone back the second time, have always improved. And I wouldn't say it's down to my coaching, it's just down to their experience, knowing actually what worked for them or what didn't work for them that year. So, nutrition wise, they're getting to their crew and realizing actually, jam sandwiches isn't what they want, or, tin of sardines isn't what they want, and stuff like that. Now, as a coach, you can educate them and try and get them to practice it in training, but actually training's only a part. It kind of comes down to, practice it under race situations. So, just having that experience of doing it the first time, you'll learn so much as a new runner, new runner to the West Highland Way, that doing it the second time, you're bound to improve. If you learn from your, not mistakes, but learn what you can improve on.
Great. And obviously, hand in hand with your own running development, your whole coaching background almost puts you sort of a step ahead of some people, because you probably can know what's happening to your body year on year and what sort of shape it's in.
Yeah, so understanding training philosophy and kind of knowing the latest sports science and, development around that, and how people adapt to training and what you're hoping to achieve from each training session. So what is the physiological adaptations you're taking? And again, a lot of people neglect. So people look at training as in what they do for that hour a day or 2 hours a day, or in the long run, 4 hours a day. But what they actually forget is actually what's just as important is the time in between your last training session to your next training session, because that's when the adaptations take place. When you train, you do micro damage to your muscle fibers or whatever training stimulus you're applying. It's only when you stop and rest, then your body actually adapts and gets fitter. So, I've worked with athletes that have kind of got manual jobs, or like joiners or builders, and their training approach has to be a bit smarter, because their recovery times are a bit shorter because they're training and then also doing manual labor. Whereas someone that's got more of a desk job can probably get away with a bit more training volume because they've got more time to recover. And then on top of recovery is also your nutrition. So, actually fueling your training, what you're doing after your training session. So one of the biggest mistakes I used to make way back in 2010 was I'd do my long run on a Saturday, and then I'd crack open a bottle of red wine thinking that was good recovery. And it worked well. I got round in under 24 hours, which is a decent time. But to get to an elite level, then that wasn't helping my adaptation to my long runs and training.
Wise words, indeed. Yes. So fast forward a few years, obviously, since your last West Highland Way, you've gone and done many adventures, as have been well chronicled. You've made GB trail teams, you've raced abroad successfully, and obviously then your big Monroe expedition. Your involvement with the Way goes to crewing. So you helped your wife Rachel to second place, I think it was in 2019, wasn't it? Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's inspired you to come back this year for more?
It's something I've always wanted to come back and do. Like, I'm not happy with my fastest time on that of 17 hours, whatever. I know I can run it faster, and it's always been fitting it in with other races that I wanted to do abroad. So it's something that I've always wanted to do, since like 2013, 2014, 2015. It's one I want to come back to do, because it's one of the first big ultras I've ever done. So I want to come back and see how well I can do now on it. So that's kind of one of the motivations that I've came back. And obviously I've worked with a lot of athletes that have done the West Highland Way. So it's always been a feature with me. Like every year I've coached at least one or two, sometimes 3 or 4 athletes or even more to do the West Highland Way. So yeah, I know a lot about it, and I'm always kind of watching it every June. So yeah, it's nice to be hopefully on the start line this year.
Yes, because obviously playing fantasy athletics a bit, I'm not going to mention names, but there's quite a good sharp end shaping up this year in the race. But number one, you've all got to get to the start line first. I think I was having a fantasy athletics conversation with someone. Well, they were having it with me actually, and I was sort of saying, "Well, hang on a minute, it's only February. Let's have this conversation in May when we see who's still fit." Of what times can be done at the sharp end of this year's race, yes. But because that in itself is a challenge. What in a sort of 4 or 5 months we've got before the race, what is your biggest tip for anyone doing it for the first time to stop them overtraining? You've alluded to having rest and assimilation time, but there's no magic formula, but what is the biggest tip or takeaway someone can take from your point of view to not overtrain?
Listen to your body. You don't have to do it as much as you think you have to do to some extent. Some athletes can tolerate 100-mile plus weeks, and some athletes you give that to and they'd end up injured. So, it's finding out what works for you. If you're unsure, that would always be a bit more conservative, because it's actually better to make the start line slightly undertrained than make the start line and have an injury or niggle or not make the start line at all. So with that kind of, maybe listen to your body a bit more. And again, kind of applying basic training principles. So every 4 to 6 weeks, you should have a slightly easier week. So don't start January and just have a progression every week, without giving yourself an easier recovery week once a month or once every 6 weeks. On that's just basic training principles. And another one, a textbook answer, but it can be moved, is no more than a 10% progression in load on a weekly basis. So if, for example, you're doing 20 miles a week, I wouldn't jump up to 40 miles the following week. Or if you did, like you went from a 20-mile week to a 30-mile week, then the following week you might have an easier week on that. So listen to your body is the best one. And if you have injuries or niggles, one of the biggest things I say to all my athletes, instead of being reactive to injury, be proactive to injury. So regular sports massage, if you can afford it, that's great. Spending time on the foam roller. If you have a niggle, ease back in training. If you're doing speed work, stop speed work, because that increases the risk of injury because you're putting more force through the joint. So actually spending more time in a steady run, which is a run where you could hold a conversation if you're running with someone, is good for base training, and that's where you should do the majority of your training. And again, if you've got a niggle and you think, I might go and do a speed session, my advice to my athletes is don't. You run a high risk of injury. Just move it back a week, let your body recover. If you've got a niggle, even reduce your training load by 50%, see if that helps clear it up, rather than trying to train through a niggle and then it becomes a full-blown injury, and then you have to take like 4 or 6 weeks off, or maybe even 2 weeks, and that can have an impact on your overall fitness leading into the race.
Fabulous. Some wonderful gems for everyone to take away there. So before we just open it up, I think, John, did you want to say a little bit about the volunteer roles this year and how they might be working?
Yeah, thanks, Adrian. Really just...
Those that don't know, John and Helen, in the background of the race, look after all the volunteers. Every year we have upwards of 100 volunteers helping out on race weekend, and John and Helen coordinate all of that, and it's no simple task. It's an awful lot of work in the background. Yeah. Okay, John.
Just in terms of where we are this year, we've already had a good response to our volunteer request. If anybody out there wants to get involved on race day, it's a great way to see the race and to learn about what goes on in the background for future years. There's a form on the website to sign up. What we'll do now is we put our fabulous aid station captains or bosses in place, and then once they're in place, we begin to fill up the different roles over the year. We also have a service for overseas runners, and we've mentioned this a little bit tonight already, but overseas runners who might struggle to bring crew with them, if you get in touch with us, we can fix you up with crew. We've got people who volunteer each year to look after overseas runners. We normally start that process round about Easter time, but if you're coming from overseas, you're worried about crewing, get in touch with us, whwcrew@westhighlandwayrace.org, and we'll sort you out. Failing that, we'll see you all in June, and there will be a good sized army of volunteers in June getting eaten alive by midges and cheering you on and making sure everyone's safe.
Great. Okay, so I'm going to throw across to Helen now and see what's been coming into the chat box to bounce off all our wonderful guests.
Okay then. there's a question from Joran, who is, I believe, in the Netherlands, and he was saying, how do we train for the hills when we don't have many hills? He got a corker of an answer from, I think it was Julie. Treadmill with an evil gradient, stairs and tall buildings, down and up. And I would say down and up and back down and up, which is, yeah, quite useful, I guess, for him. We've got David Taylor saying that he's carrying some wee niggles, but the advice that he's given about hill walking and doing some weight work and thing, that I think that's given him some confidence. Here's one at the bottom. I know this is a very broad question, but for a 24-hour plus runner, what would people advise as an average weekly mileage? Anybody want to take that one up?
Susie, as an average plus 24-hour runner, what sort of weekly mileage were you doing? Building up to the race last year.
Yeah, I was aiming to do, it could range between 50, 60, 70 miles a week, yeah. And I'm just trying to build that up now. Over the winter time, I've just been kind of ticking over, if you like, just doing 40, 50 miles a week. But I'm trying to get that up. I think I feel at my best for me if I'm doing like 60 to 70 a week in the build up to it.
And how many days a week are you aiming to run?
Most days, 6 days a week. Like, as I said, like sometimes twice a day, 3 times a day, just to accumulate that. So I think one thing for me this year, what I'm going to do differently is trying to get some runs through the night, because I think when I got into the second night, because I was like over the 30 hours, that I had not prepared for that at all, and that's what really got me. So I think I'm going to trying to accumulate like through the night as well, just to get my body used to that, running at that time of night as well and through the night.
A very good ancillary tip. Yes, the people who are out longer, as Donnie has alluded to, you're all admiration to them, because it's easy to get it done in 16, 17 hours and get in your bed and breakfast in Fort William, whereas people like you were out and sort of get to bed if you're lucky before prize giving. Yeah.
I got double the amount of time on the West Highland Way than these guys.
Yes.
Value for your money.
A bonus.
Okay, what else is there, Helen? Yes.
I'm just looking back up now, because I think everybody's been so taken by the narrative from our presenters that they've just been sitting listening in awe.
I have one question I'll address to all 4 of you, actually. In that case, while Helen's looking through, we've talked a little about getting ready for the hills uphill. Those of us that know the Highland Way know there is this lovely, lovely downhill from the Devil's Staircase down into Kinlochleven, which is it's the quad buster, as we all call it. From a coaching point of view, Donnie, people talk about doing uphill sessions. Should they do the odd downhill session to get their quads used to that wonderful 1.5 miles downhill to sea level?
Thanks for bringing that up, because I was going to come back to Joran's question about living in Holland and about training for hills. Actually, the biggest question you should be asking is how do I train for the downhills, because that's what's going to hurt most in the race. And obviously, you've got your first steep descent of Conic Hill, and if you've not run downhill, that's where you do the most muscle damage. So eccentric loading of the muscles, without getting too technical, that damages the muscle. That's what gives you the sore quads, the DOMs. That's where, like, if you've done a marathon, you can't walk the next day downstairs, is you've damaged the muscle. So for Joran in Holland, then my advice as a coach would be, yes, treadmill, incline, hill reps, stair mill machines are good, like moving staircases in the gyms, stairways and tall buildings. And then I'd also plan, weekend trips to maybe France or closer by into Europe to get some hills in, maybe 2 or 3 weekends nearer the West Highland Way on that. And then the downhill, you're looking at plyometric sessions, where there's a lot of jumping and springing. So it's mimicking that downhill action of loading the quads for that. So that's very specific to Joran, but yeah, not neglect your plyometric sessions. And I'd build up to at least 1 session a week plyometrics, because that's going to help condition legs as best you can for downhill living in a flat environment. And I have coached athletes that live in flat environments for hilly races, and that's the method I use, is plyometrics to mimic the downhill stresses on the body as much as you can until you can get to downhills. And I recommend maybe a couple of weekends in Europe to maybe the Alps to mimic the downhills. Back to your original question on downhill sessions, it depends what the athlete's training on. So if the athlete is training mainly on trails and it's got a lot of undulation, then if they're doing tempo runs on trails, then they're already getting some downhill stimulation on the downhill running. If they run somewhere flat, then yeah, I might set specific downhill sessions to condition the quads for that race. So it's very dependent on the athlete, but there would be some sort of downhill running in the training, whether it happens naturally because they live in a hilly environment, they're always on trails, or they do some actual hill running as well, or if they don't, then I would specifically prescribe that. If I look at their training and they're mostly flatter roads, then I would prescribe some downhill sessions. And some things I also prescribe is downhill running technique, which a lot of people neglect. So actually being able to be efficient downhill is kind of like free money when you're running ultras. You see people that, come to downhill and struggle to get down the hill and lose a lot of time. So there's no point in just keep doing it. It's kind of looking at for coaching points on how to run downhill and working on that technique. And that'll make you more of an efficient descender. And generally, it'll actually help you preserve your muscles, because if you're nervous and tense on a descent, your tendency is to be quite tense, and that's going to fatigue the muscle quicker than if you're relaxed and had good technique on the downhill. So that's my answer to that question.
It's a very good answer.
Joran's response to that was, thank you for the advice, and it's a good thing his wife is listening with him, which actually leads me on to something else, which I was going to say, and it was something that somebody said earlier on. I think it was Susie maybe raised it. She'd said about having a very specific plan for her crew, as in for their roles and to help them as well. And I know that John's put a comment up, and I know from experience that he's a real stickler for a crew plan. But the other thing I would say is, and particularly as the race goes further on, if you're crewing, don't give your runner a choice. Don't ask them if they would prefer Lucozade or Iron Brew or Coke or water. Hand them a bottle and say, drink. Then hand them something else and say, eat. Because they can't think. Your runner's brain kicks in. Do you want your head torch? What's a head torch? I don't know if I want my head torch. Just do it for them. Because that's the way you'll get them to keep on moving, and particularly the latter stages when they get tired and a bit disoriented. And I think Susie would probably agree with that one. But the basis of that is that she had the plan written down there, and it's things like, if you have to take medication, put that on the plan. When do you take that medication? When you come into Balmaha, brush your teeth, put that on the plan so somebody's got a toothbrush there for you. Things like that. Think about your day and how, and particularly for people who are out longer. I mean, you speedy guys that are sitting at the top of my screen at the moment, you just fly through it all and it's done, and you brush your teeth when you get to the end. That's great. But for people who take a bit longer, it can really waken you up and make you feel better. But it's little things like that that will make the difference.
I see David Taylor is asking on the chat box, is there a good form or template for a crew plan? And it's such a vast topic. We are, like last year, we're planning a couple of other evenings similar to this with other guests, but crewing and more specific nutrition we will be covering on a future one. So hold fire, David. We will have some help for you at a future evening. Yes. Okay.
I think that's about us then, Adrian. I think.
Being a shoe geek, I just want to quickly go around all four people and ask them what shoe they wore last year. Starting with Robbie, what shoes did you wear last year? And did you have two questions? What shoes did you wear? And did you wear the same shoes throughout, or did you change shoes throughout the race?
So a few years ago, I started wearing the Ultra shoes that currently are the sponsor of the race. Not currently on their books, but if they're listening, free pair of shoes and all that. But I wore the Lone Peaks, so the Ultra Lone Peaks for the West Highland Way. I'd worn their sort of less cushion trail shoe for the Highland Fling, the Superiors, but it left my calves were in a bit of a state after the fling, but I think that was down to the sort of the weather and the heat and a bit of dehydration. So, but the Lone Peaks were great, and I wore them throughout the whole race. So no change of shoes and no change of socks either. I managed to come away unscathed in that department.
Fabulous. Lynn, what shoes did you wear, and did you change shoes at all in the event?
Yeah, I went with the Scott Ultra Super Track, and I did change them at Lundrover into Scott again, but just the Scott, I think they're the RC, they're a slightly wider fit. I felt like my feet were a little bit more swollen, so I just kind of took that time at Lundrover to change, and both of them worked really well. Quite a lot of cushion and a good traction on them as well. So yeah.
Okay. And Susie, what shoes and did you change at all?
Yeah, the first half I just wore my road shoes actually. I had my Asics Kayano, which I've always worn on the road. And then I changed at Octatire to Hawker Speedgoat for the rest of it. Didn't change my socks at all. I was offered to get a sock change at Kinloch leaving, but I said, just do not touch anything. No. And I think I probably funked out at that stage.
Yeah, good. Okay.
Yeah.
So
yeah, we change at Octatire.
Okay. And Donny, if you can remember back to your last West Highland Way, what shoes and did you change at all?
I wouldn't have changed my shoes, and I remember in 2011 when I ran Sky, I was wearing the Innovate F Light 195s, which I don't think they make anymore. They were a classic shoe back in the day.
Yeah. As a supplemental geeky question, as it's so long ago for the Highland Way, when you did your Monroe round, what shoes were you wearing then? What's your favourite shoe on that? I'm sure you got through a few pairs as well. Yeah.
So I was wearing the Salomon S-Lab Sense 8 soft ground, so kind of like a soft ground shoe for like the boggy stuff, and then I had like their dry shoe for like Ben Lomond and stuff on that. So I've always ran in fairly minimalist shoes, so don't think people on the shoe I'm going to copy Donny. If you're used to running in Asics Canyons, that'd be the worst thing you could do right now. On that, so yeah, running roughly a 3-4 millimeter drop shoe. So yeah, the S-Lab Sense 8 soft grounds was one of my favorite shoes, and then just the Sense 8, which is the red and white one, the red and black at the time. But Salomon have stopped making them shoes, which I'm desperately disappointed about as well.
The thing with shoes is they change and evolve. Yes, and we've all had favorite shoes, but it's just giving our listeners a little theme that there's 4 different runners, 4 different shoes. Some changed, some didn't. So there's nothing. It's a question people often ask, and it's there's no fixed answer. Oh, yeah. Okay, well, I think unless there's any other questions have come in, I think we're going to sort of get around to winding it up there.
Yeah, I think we're at the point now people are starting to say thank you, Adrian, and they've been appreciated the advice.
So I just want to say a big thank you to our 4 guests, to Donny and to Lynn and to Susie and Robbie. Thank you so much for all your advice. I really hope for everyone listening, if you go home with just one idea you gleaned tonight, it's been a plus. There's lots of thumbs up coming up the screen that I'm looking at. So I think that's a big vote of thanks to all of you. And thanks to Helen and John for organising all this in the background, and for Ian to steering the ship for us all, as always, throughout the year. If you haven't seen them yet, go onto our shop and see our lovely bobble hats. Sorry, I haven't got one to model. We've got some lovely woolly bobble hats with the West Highland Way logo on. John, thank you very much. Yes, there's still some left, and we've still got a few hoodies as well. So go onto the shop site on the, thanks, John, and grab yourself a beanie. Okay, they're lovely. It's still
Love
lovely
mine,
for this cold weather. Yes. Susie, well done.
Love mine.
Commission's in the post, both of you. Okay. Okay, people, keep training hard, and we'll see you soon for some more inspiration at our next night. Okay, thank you so much, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks.
Thanks so much, everyone. That was great.
Oh, some great comments coming up in the chat box. Thank you.
It was really interesting to hear some of the things that Donny was saying as well from his coaching side. So taken some little notes there. So thank you.
No worries.
He might have some slots open on his coaching courses. I don't know. How many people do you coach at a time, Donny? Yeah.
Up to about mid-30s, and then depending on where they're at, I don't want to spread myself too thin, because I like to have a lot of interaction and build a coach-athlete relationship. So that's important for me. So yeah.
Good. Well, you're doing something right with several people, so it's good to see. Yeah,
yeah, it's always good to see them do well.
That must be very gratifying, certainly. Yeah. Great. Okay, thanks ever so much, everybody. We'll see you all soon. Keep training well. Lynn, I forgot to ask, you aren't running the race this year. What do you have any plans for the year running wise?
Lakeland 100.
Fabulous.
I've got coming up. I'm crewing for West Highland Way, so I'll be
Okay.
there. Yeah.
Good.
But,
Good. Yeah. So, have you done Lakeland before?
No.
Okay.
So
Yeah,
couldn't turn down the opportunity to do that. Definitely not. I
I
also have a race in Romania as well coming up. So.
Oh, wow. Right. Okay.
80K. So looking forward to that very much.
Very good. Yeah. Okay. Thanks very much, everybody. Really appreciate you giving up your time. Yes.
Brilliant, Adrian.
Thanks,
Thanks so
everyone.
much for
Bye
that.
everyone. Bye
Everyone.
Cheers.
All the